I need to talk about this because I think if I don't say it out loud to somebody, or write it, or whatever this is, I'm going to keep rearranging it in my head until it stops being true, and I don't want that. I don't want to be the person who smooths this over. I've watched everyone around me smooth it over for 2 months, and I know what that looks like from the outside, and I don't want to do it. So, March 14th, a Saturday. Lena Koss's apartment on Birch Street, second floor, the one with the blue door and the fire escape that everyone sits on in the summer, even though the landlord put a sign up. Party started around 9. I got there at 9:30 with a bottle of wine and a six-pack of the IPA that Kai likes, because Kai had texted me that afternoon asking if I was coming, and I'd said yes, and he'd said, bring the good IPA, and I'd said define good, and he'd sent back a picture of the label, and I'd gone to the shop on Ellsworth and bought it. I'm telling you the details because the details are the part I'm sure about. The bottle of wine was a Malbec with a green label. The IPA was in a cardboard carrier. I was wearing a gray sweater and jeans and the boots with the side zip that I bought in January. I walked from my apartment to Lena's, which takes 11 minutes. I remember the walk. I remember the cold. It was still cold in March, that kind of cold where you can feel it on your teeth when you breathe. I remember the light in Lena's windows from the street. I remember Lena buzzing me in. Lena's apartment is a railroad layout, kitchen at the front, then the living room, then the bedroom at the back. The party was mostly in the kitchen and the living room. There were maybe 20 people there when I arrived. I knew most of them. I put the wine on the counter and handed Kai the IPA, and he said, "You're a champion," and opened one immediately. I poured myself a glass of the wine. I talked to Lena in the kitchen for a while about her sister's wedding, which was coming up in April. I talked to Devin in the living room about the documentary series everyone was watching. I talked to Sonia near the fire escape door about her new job, which she hated already. Normal conversations, normal night. I left around 1. Kai walked me partway home because we lived in the same direction. We talked about a trip he wanted to plan for the summer. I got home, brushed my teeth, went to bed. That's the night. That's all of it, from my side. Here's what happened after. The week after the party, Lena didn't answer my text about brunch. This was unusual. Lena and I had done brunch most Sundays for almost a year since I'd moved to the city. I texted again on Monday. She replied on Tuesday. Short, friendly, said she'd been busy, rain check. I said sure. We didn't reschedule. Devin stopped coming to the Thursday thing. The Thursday thing was informal. 4 or 5 of us would go to the bar on Caldwell after work, drink until 8 or 9, go home. Devin had been there almost every week since November. The first Thursday he missed, I didn't notice. The second Thursday, I asked Sonia if Devin was okay. She said she thought so. The third Thursday, Devin texted the group chat and said he was taking a break from going out for a while. Nobody pushed back. I said, "Hope you're good," and he hearted the message. And that was it. By mid-April, the group chat was quieter. Not dead, people still posted things, but the texture had changed. There were fewer replies, fewer inside jokes, fewer of the small ambient messages that keep a group chat alive. The memes, the complaints about work, the anyone want to grab food, posts. The chat felt like a room where someone had turned the music down, but nobody had said why. I want to tell you that I noticed this immediately and responded with clarity and purpose. I didn't. I noticed it the way you notice a headache that's been building for an hour, not when it starts, but when it crosses a line, and then you think back and realize it's been there for a while. I noticed it in late April, sitting on my couch on a Sunday afternoon, scrolling the group chat, trying to remember the last time someone had suggested we all do something together. The last time had been March 12th. 2 days before the party, Lena had posted, "Party Saturday, my place, bring whoever," 17 responses. After that, nothing collective. Individual messages, small threads, but nothing that gathered the group. I texted Kai. Kai was the person I was closest to in the group, and he was also the person least likely to be weird about a direct question. I said, "Is everything okay with everyone? Feels like people have been kind of distant." He didn't respond for 4 hours. Then he said, yeah, I think people are just busy. Spring stuff. I said, you sure? Lena hasn't responded to me in weeks. He said, I'll ask her. 2 days later, Lena texted me. She said, hey, sorry I've been MIA. Things are crazy with the wedding planning. Let's catch up soon. I said, okay. We didn't catch up. I'm going to skip ahead to May because May is when I stopped being able to tell myself it was spring stuff. In May, I ran into Sonia at the grocery store on Ellsworth, the same one where I'd bought Kai's IPA. Sonia and I were not as close as Lena and I had been, but we were friendly, and we had always been comfortable enough to be honest with each other in the low-key way that people are honest when they don't have a lot invested. She was in the produce section. I said hi. She said hi. We talked for a minute about her job, which she still hated. Then I said, because I had been carrying the question for weeks and it was starting to feel heavy. Sonia, did something happen with the group? People have been weird since March, and nobody will tell me what's going on. She put down the avocado she was holding. She looked at me. She had a specific expression that I'm going to try to describe accurately because I've thought about it a lot since. It was the expression of someone who has been expecting a question and has prepared an answer and does not like the answer and is going to give it anyway. She said, nothing happened. I said, something happened. She said, Nora. That's my name. She said my name the way you say someone's name when you're about to not tell them something. Then she said, I think people just need some space. It's not about you. I said, if it's not about me, why is everyone avoiding me specifically? She picked the avocado back up. She said, I don't think anyone is avoiding you. She said it carefully, the way you handle something fragile, and I knew she was lying, and she knew I knew, and neither of us said anything else about it. We talked for another minute about nothing, and then she said she had to go. I stood in the produce section for a while after she left. I remember the fluorescent lights and the mist machine going off over the lettuce. I remember thinking, I have done something and nobody will tell me what. That thought, I have done something, is the thought I lived inside for the rest of May. It is a specific kind of misery, the kind where you scan every interaction you can remember, every text, every offhand comment, every slightly too long silence, looking for the moment you broke something. I went through the party in my head dozens of times. I could not find anything wrong. I had arrived, talked, laughed, left. I had not been excessively drunk. I had not started an argument. I had not said anything cruel or careless. Not that I remembered, and I was not, as a rule, a cruel or careless person when drinking. I was, if anything, more careful when drinking, because I had grown up with a father who was not, and I had trained myself early to watch my own behavior when the wine was open. I called Kai at the end of May, not texted, called. He picked up after 3 rings, which meant he was deciding whether to answer. I said, Kai, I need you to tell me what happened at Lena's party. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, what do you mean? I said, I mean that everyone has been acting like I did something terrible and nobody will say what. I need to know, even if it's bad, even if I'm going to be embarrassed. I need to know. He said, Nora, you didn't do anything terrible. I said, then what? He breathed out. I could hear him thinking. I could hear the specific quality of his breathing that meant he was choosing words. He said, can we get a coffee? We met the next morning at the place on Alderman Street. He was already there when I arrived. He had a coffee in front of him and he had not touched it. I sat down. He looked at me the way Sonia had looked at me. Prepared, reluctant, careful. He said, I want to say first that I don't think this is a big deal. I think people are being weird about it, and I've told them that. I said, okay. He said, at the party, in March. You were talking to me in the kitchen, right? We were by the fridge. You were telling me about that thing with your landlord, the heating thing. I said, yes. I remembered this. The landlord had been slow about fixing the radiator in my bedroom, and I had been venting about it. Standard complaint. Kai had been sympathetic. He said, we talked for a while, maybe 15, 20 minutes. You were standing right there. By the fridge. I could see you the whole time. I said, yes. He said, at the same time you were talking to me. The exact same time. Devin and Sonia were in the living room, and you were talking to them too. I did not understand what he was saying. I want to be clear about that. The sentence reached me and I processed it as a grammatical structure, and I did not understand its content. I said, what do you mean? He said, I mean you were in two places, in the kitchen with me and in the living room with Devin and Sonia. At the same time, for about 20 minutes. I said, that's not possible. He said, I know. I said, I was in the kitchen with you. I remember being in the kitchen with you. He said, you were. You were also in the living room. Devin talked to you about the documentary. Sonia talked to you about her job. They both remember the conversations in detail. I remember ours in detail. We've compared. The conversations were different. The topics were different. You were standing in two different rooms having two separate conversations and nobody noticed until after. I sat with this. The coffee shop was bright. There were other people at other tables. A woman near the window was reading a book. A man at the counter was ordering a latte. The espresso machine was making its sound. I sat in that ordinary room with that ordinary noise and I tried to understand what Kai was telling me. I said, how did you find out? He said, Devin mentioned on Monday or Tuesday after the party that he'd had a good talk with you about the documentary. I said that was funny because I'd been talking to you for most of the night in the kitchen. He said you'd been in the living room. I said no, you'd been in the kitchen. We went back and forth. Eventually we asked Sonia. Sonia confirmed you'd been in the living room with them, and then we asked Lena. Lena said she'd seen you in the kitchen. 2 people saw you in the kitchen. 2 people saw you in the living room. The times overlapped by about 20 minutes. I said, there's an explanation for this. I went back and forth. I was in the kitchen for a while. Then I went to the living room. Then I came back. Kai shook his head. He said, we thought that too, but Devin said you were mid-sentence when I said you were mid-sentence. He described the point in your conversation with him that was happening at the same time as the point in your conversation with me. They don't overlap in a way that allows for back and forth. You didn't leave the kitchen. I was looking at you. You didn't leave the living room. Devin was looking at you. I said, Devin is wrong. Kai said, maybe, but Sonia isn't wrong too, and Lena isn't wrong too, and I'm not wrong. I asked him why nobody had said anything to me. He looked at his coffee. He said, what would we say? This is the part where I am supposed to tell you that I went home and fell apart, or that I didn't believe him, or that I demanded proof. I didn't do any of those things. I went home and I sat on my couch and I tried to remember the party, and what I remembered was this. I was in the kitchen the whole time. I talked to Kai by the fridge. I talked to Lena near the stove. At some point I refilled my wine. I went to the living room later, much later, closer to midnight, and talked to a few people briefly before Kai and I left. I did not have a long conversation with Devin. I did not have a long conversation with Sonia in the living room. I had talked to Sonia near the fire escape door, which is off the kitchen, not the living room. That was my memory. It was clear. It was continuous. It had no gaps. I called Devin. Devin picked up, which surprised me because Devin had been avoiding me for 2 months. His voice was careful but not unkind. I asked him to describe our conversation at the party. He said, you came into the living room around 10:30. You sat on the arm of the couch. You asked me about the documentary, the ocean one, the one about the fishing boats. We talked about it for a while. You said something about how the second episode was better than the first because it stopped trying to make the fishermen sympathetic and just let them be complicated. I remember that specifically because I thought it was a good observation, and I told you so, and you laughed. I had watched the documentary. I had thought the second episode was better. I would have said exactly that. I said, Devin, what was I wearing? He said, gray sweater, jeans, those boots with the zip on the side. I said, what was I drinking? He said, red wine, in a regular glass, not a wine glass, one of Lena's blue tumblers. I had been drinking red wine out of one of Lena's blue tumblers. In the kitchen, by the fridge, talking to Kai. I said, Did I seem normal? Devin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, completely normal. You were yourself. That's the thing, Nora. Both of you were just you. He said both of you, and then caught himself. I heard him catch himself. The pause was less than a second. I said both of me. He said, I didn't mean it like that. I said, how did you mean it? He said, I just mean, when Kai told me, I went back over the conversation in my head and there was nothing off about you. You weren't weird, you weren't distracted, you were present. You were making eye contact. You laughed at the right things. If Kai hadn't said anything, I would never have. I mean, it wouldn't have occurred to me that anything was wrong. I thanked him. I hung up. I called Sonia. Sonia didn't pick up. I texted her. I talked to Kai. I know what happened. Can we please talk? She called me back an hour later. She was guarded. I asked her to describe the conversation she'd had with me in the living room that night. She said, you came over and sat near the bookshelf, not on the couch, sort of leaning against the wall. You asked me about the new job. I told you it was miserable. You said something about how the first 3 months of any job are the worst and that I should give it until summer. You said you'd been through the same thing when you first moved here. I had been through the same thing. I would have said exactly that. The advice sounded like me. The phrasing sounded like me. I said, Sonia, was I holding anything? She said, your glass. The wine? I said, a blue tumbler? She said, yeah, one of Lena's. I sat down on the floor of my apartment, which is where I had ended up during the call, not having noticed that I was no longer on the couch. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, and I said, Sonia, I don't remember being in the living room with you. I remember being in the kitchen. I remember being in the kitchen the entire time. I don't remember the conversation you just described. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I know. I said, what do you mean, you know? She said, Kai told us you wouldn't remember. He said you only remember the kitchen. I said, why would Kai know that? She said, because he asked you. Last week, I think, or the week before. He asked you about the party and you described the kitchen. You didn't mention the living room. He told us. Kai had not told me he had asked me about the party before our conversation at the coffee shop. He had presented that conversation as though it were the first time we were discussing it. He had already known what I remembered and what I didn't. I did not call Kai back, not immediately. I sat on the floor of my apartment and I thought, what I thought was this, 20 minutes. 20 minutes during which, according to 4 people I trusted, I was in 2 rooms at the same time, having 2 separate conversations, both of which sounded like me, both of which contained opinions and phrases I would actually use, both of which were conducted with eye contact and laughter in the full social presence of a normal human being at a party. And from the inside, from my side, there had been nothing. No flicker, no doubling. No sense of being stretched or divided or wrong. I had been in the kitchen whole, having a single continuous experience, and somewhere else in the apartment, simultaneously, I had also been whole, also continuous, also having an experience I cannot access. I want to describe what that feels like to sit with, because it doesn't feel like anything I have a word for. It's not fear exactly. It's closer to the feeling of discovering that you've been sleepwalking, that your body has been doing things without your awareness. Except that in this case, my body was not doing things without awareness. The version of me in the living room was aware. She was making observations about a documentary. She was giving advice about a job. She was present. She was me. And I don't have her memory. I want to tell you about Lena now because Lena's the part that made this worse. I went to Lena's apartment on a Wednesday evening in early June. I did not text ahead. I buzzed the door. She let me in. When I got upstairs, she was standing in the kitchen. The same kitchen. With a cup of tea, and she looked at me the way all of them had been looking at me, which I now understood was not hostility and was not pity, but was something closer to vertigo. The look of someone who is standing next to a thing they cannot explain and has decided for their own stability to leave it alone. I said, Lena, I need to ask you about the party. She said, I figured. I said, where did you see me that night? She said, in the kitchen, with Kai. I said, did you see me in the living room? She said, no. But that doesn't mean anything. I was in the kitchen most of the night. I said, Kai said you confirmed I was in the kitchen. She said, I did. You were in the kitchen from about 9:45 until at least 11. I saw you the whole time. You were by the fridge. I said, okay. She drank her tea, then she said, Nora, can I tell you something that I haven't told the others? I said, please. She set the tea down. She said, at about 10:40. I know the time because I had checked my phone for a text from my sister. I was standing at the stove. You were at the fridge with Kai. I could see you clearly. You were laughing at something he'd said. And at the same time, I could hear your voice coming from the living room. I waited. She said, not faintly, not like background noise. Your voice, clearly, the cadence, the pitch, the way you pause before you say something funny. I could hear you in two places at the same time. I looked at you in the kitchen. You were there. You were laughing. You were holding your glass. And your voice was also coming from the other room, saying something about a fishing boat. The documentary, the fishing boats from the documentary. She said, I almost went into the living room to check. I was about to, and then, this is the part I can't explain. I decided not to. I said, you decided not to. She said, yeah. And the decision didn't feel like mine. It felt like the kind of decision you make when you're dreaming, and something in the dream tells you not to open a door, and you don't open it. Not because you're afraid, because the dream has already decided for you. She said, I went back to my tea. I forgot about it. I actually forgot about it until Devin brought it up on Monday, and then I remembered all at once the whole thing. The voice, the not looking, the feeling of the dream decision. And I knew that what Devin was telling me was true, because I had heard it. I sat in Lena's kitchen for a long time after that. The same kitchen, the same fridge, the same distance between the stove and the spot where Kai had been standing. I said, Lena, why didn't anyone tell me? She said, because we talked about it, the four of us, and we decided that there was nothing to tell you that you could do anything about. You didn't know. You don't remember the living room. If we told you, what would you do? What could you do? I said, you could have let me decide that. She said, yeah. She looked at the counter. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. I said, is that why everyone's been avoiding me? She closed her eyes briefly. She said, people aren't avoiding you. They're being careful around you because they don't know if it's going to happen again. And they don't know what it means. And they don't want to be around it if it does. And they feel terrible about that. I feel terrible about that. But I don't know how to sit next to you at brunch and not think about it. I went home. I'm going to describe the next 2 weeks as briefly as I can, because the next 2 weeks were mostly me trying to disprove what I'd been told, and I want to be honest about the fact that I failed. I went through my phone. The texts from the night of March 14th were normal. A few messages in the group chat, a selfie Lena had posted around 11. Nothing unusual. I was not in the selfie. The selfie showed Lena and 2 other people in the kitchen. Behind them, slightly out of focus, was the fridge. Nobody was standing at the fridge. This meant nothing. I could have been in the bathroom, or moved briefly, or been out of frame. But I noted it. I looked for photographs from the party. There were very few. Lena's selfie, a blurry shot someone had posted of the fire escape. A group photo that Devin had taken in the living room around 11:30, well after the 20-minute window. I was in the group photo, standing at the edge of the frame, holding a blue tumbler. Normal. I asked Kai by text what time the 20-minute window had been. He said it was roughly 10:30 to 10:50, based on his best reconstruction. I asked if anyone had taken a photograph during that window. He said he didn't think so. I asked if Lena had a security camera, or a doorbell camera, or anything that might have recorded the apartment that night. She did not. I went to a doctor. I'm saying this because I want the record to show that I tried the rational thing. I told my GP that I had experienced what I described as a dissociative episode. She asked questions. She referred me to a neurologist. The neurologist saw me 2 weeks later. She did an EEG and an MRI. Both were normal. She said that dissociative episodes could occur under stress, with alcohol, with sleep deprivation, and that a single episode, even a dramatic one, was not necessarily indicative of a disorder. She asked me to monitor and report back. I did not tell the neurologist that 4 people had seen me in 2 places at the same time. I told her that I had experienced a memory gap at a party. I did not tell her the rest because I was not ready to hear her response, and because I was still holding under the possibility that my friends were wrong, that the overlapping conversations had not actually overlapped, that the timing was off by 20 minutes and nobody had noticed because nobody checks the time at a party. But Lena had checked the time. Lena had checked her phone at 10:40, and Lena had heard my voice in 2 rooms. I want to describe what happened at the end of June, because it's the reason I'm writing this. I was at the coffee shop on Alderman, the same one where I'd met Kai. It was a Saturday morning, about 10. The shop was busy, maybe 15 people, a line at the counter, the barista calling out names. I was sitting at a table by the window alone, reading on my phone, drinking a flat white. A woman came up to my table. She was about 40, someone I had never seen before. She said, "Excuse me, are you Nora?" I said yes. She said, "I thought so. We just talked at the counter." I had not been at the counter. I had been at my table for 20 minutes. I had ordered when I arrived and had not gotten up. I said, "I'm sorry, I think you have me confused with someone." She said, "No, we talked. Just now, you were in line. You said you liked my bag." She held up a canvas tote with a botanical print on it. "You said your aunt used to do watercolors like this." My Aunt Renata used to do watercolors. I have never mentioned this to anyone except my mother and Will. It is not something I talk about. It is a small, private piece of family history that lives in a drawer in my memory alongside other small, private things that do not come up at coffee shops with strangers. I said, "When did we talk?" She said, 5 minutes ago. In the line. You were right behind me. I looked at the counter. The line was 4 people deep. I was not in it. I looked around the coffee shop. There was no one in the shop who looked like me. The woman followed my gaze. Her face did a small, complicated thing. She said, "You were right there." She pointed at a spot in the line. Then she said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm fine. I think there's been a misunderstanding." She left. She walked out of the coffee shop. I watched her go. I sat at my table. My flat white was warm. My phone was on the table. My hands were on either side of the phone, flat on the surface, and I could feel both of them, and they were both mine, and I was in one place, in one body, in one chair. I looked at the window. The glass was bright with morning light, and I could see my reflection, and behind my reflection, the street, and behind the street, the building across the road, and in the glass I was alone and singular, and sitting exactly where I was sitting. The barista called out a name. Nora. I looked up. There was a cup on the counter. A flat white. The barista was looking around the shop for whoever had ordered it. She caught my eye. She said, "Nora. Flat white?" I had my flat white. It was on my table. I had ordered it 20 minutes ago, and it was in front of me, half finished. I stood up. I walked to the counter. I looked at the cup. Written on the side, in the barista's handwriting, was my name. The cup was hot. It had just been made. I said, "I already got my drink." The barista looked at me, then at the cup, then at her screen. She said, "Huh. I've got 2 orders for Nora. Same drink." She shrugged. "Maybe it double rang. Sorry about that. You want it anyway?" On us. I took the cup. I sat back down. I now had 2 flat whites. I put them side by side on the table. They were the same size, the same color, the same temperature. Both had my name on the side. Both were in the standard cup. One I had ordered, one I had not. I drank mine. I left the other one on the table when I left. I walked home in the sun, and I sat on my couch, and I did not call anyone because I did not know what I would say that would make the thing I had just experienced into a thing that could be discussed on a phone call. This is what I know. I know that on March 14th at a party, I was in two places at the same time. I know that four people confirmed this and that their accounts are consistent and specific and do not contradict each other. I know that I remember only one of the two experiences. I know that the version of me I don't remember behaved exactly like me, used my phrases, held my opinions, wore my clothes, drank from the same kind of glass. I know that on a Saturday in June, a stranger in a coffee shop had a conversation with someone who looked like me, knew things only I would know, and ordered my exact drink while I was sitting 15 feet away. I know that from the inside I felt nothing, no split, no doubling, no sense that I was anything other than one person in one place. I have thought about this for 6 weeks, and I want to tell you the conclusion I have reached, which is not a conclusion, but a shape. The shape is this. I am not always singular. I don't know when it started. I don't know how often it happens. I don't know whether the other version of me, and I hate that phrase, I hate writing it, but I don't have a better one in is present all the time or only sometimes. I don't know whether she's here now. I don't know whether she has her own experience of this, somewhere, sitting in some other room, writing her own version. I know that from the inside there is no seam. There is no moment where I feel myself divide. There is no warning. There is no sensation. I am always, as far as I can tell, one person, continuous, whole. But the people around me see too. I called Will last week. We had been talking less. Not because of this, or not only because of this, but because I had been pulling back from everyone, and he had noticed, and he had been patient in the way he is always patient, which is to say, he had not pushed, and he had not asked, and he had waited for me to come to him. I told him. I told him everything. The party, the coffee shop, the conversations with Kai and Devin and Sonia and Lena. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Nora, do you remember Tuesday night?" I said, "This Tuesday?" He said, "Yeah, we were on the phone. We talked for about an hour. You told me about a book you'd been reading, the one about the architect." I said, "Yes, I remember." He said, "After we hung up, I went to brush my teeth. And my phone rang again. It was you, your number I picked up. You said you'd forgotten to tell me something. We talked for another 10 minutes. You told me about the same book, but different parts of it, different chapters. You said the ending had surprised you." I said, "I didn't call you back on Tuesday." He said, "I know, I checked. My phone shows 2 calls from you that night. One at 9:14, 53 minutes. One at 10:11, 9 minutes. I said, "Will, I made one call at 9. I hung up at 10:07. I went to bed." He was quiet again. Then he said very carefully, "The second call was you. It was your voice. You called me by the thing you call me. You laughed the way you laugh. It was you." I said, "What did I say about the book?" He said, "You said the ending was about forgiveness, and that you hadn't expected it to be about forgiveness, and that it made you think about your dad." I have not finished the book. I am on chapter 11. I do not know how it ends. Will said, "Nora." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Are you okay?" I told him I didn't know. That was last week. I have not called him since. I have not called anyone since. I have been in my apartment, alone, as far as I can tell alone, trying to figure out what to do with the knowledge that somewhere, at some point in the recent past or the present or tomorrow, there is a version of me who has finished the book, who knows how it ends, who is calling the people I love and having conversations I don't remember, who is standing in lines I haven't stood in, who is giving advice and making observations and laughing, and who is, by every account, indistinguishable from me. I have not finished the book. I put it in a drawer. I cannot bring myself to read the ending, because if I read the ending, and it is about forgiveness, and it makes me think about my dad, then I will know that the version Will spoke to on Tuesday knew this because she had already read it, which means she is ahead of me, which means I am not the first version. I am the one who hasn't caught up yet. And if I don't read it, if I leave it in the drawer, then the ending belongs to her and not to me. and the gap between us will stay open, and I will never know whether she has stopped or whether she is still out there, still being me, still going to the places I go and talking to the people I talk to, and living a life that is mine but that I do not have access to from the inside. I do not know which of those is worse. I have started leaving small notes for myself around the apartment. Timestamps. Nora was here at 2:15 p.m. Nora made coffee at 7:30 a.m. Nora is writing this at 11:42 p.m. on a Thursday in July. I stick them on the fridge, on the bathroom mirror, on the back of the front door. I am trying to establish a continuous chain of presence, a way of proving to myself that I am always where I think I am. The notes are always where I leave them when I come back to check. But twice now, there have been additional notes. In my handwriting, in my pen, stuck in places I do not remember sticking them. One on the kitchen window, one on the inside of the closet door. They say the same kind of thing. A time, a date, a location. Nora was here at 3:10 p.m. The times do not overlap with mine. The handwriting is mine. The pen is the same pen. She is leaving notes too. I think she is trying to tell me that she is real. I think she is as confused as I am. I think she is sitting in a version of this apartment that is this apartment, writing in a version of this notebook that is this notebook, trying to understand why the people she loves have been looking at her strangely, trying to understand why the group chat went quiet after March, trying to understand the gap. Or maybe that is what I want to think, because the alternative, that she is not confused, that she knows exactly what she is, that she has always known, is something I'm not able to sit with yet. I am going to stop writing now. It is late. The apartment is quiet. I am in one place, in one body, in one chair. I can feel the pen in my hand and the notebook under my palm and the specific slight roughness of the paper. I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to leave this notebook open on the kitchen table, on this page, so that if she comes, if she is here tonight, or early tomorrow, or whenever she is, she can read what I have written. And if there is writing on the next page when I wake up, I will know she is real, and I will read what she has to say, and I will decide what to do. And if there is not, if the next page is blank in the morning, I will not know whether she was never here, or whether she read this and chose not to respond, or whether I am her and she is me, and there is only one of us, and the coffee shop and the party and the phone call were something else, something I have no name for, something that everyone I love has been carefully looking away from, because looking at it is the thing that makes it visible. Lena said the decision not to look into the living room did not feel like hers. I have been thinking about that sentence for 2 months. I think there is a version of the world where the decision is made for you, where you don't look because looking is what separates, where everyone at the party could have walked into the living room and seen me there and seen me in the kitchen at the same time, and the two of me would have become, what? Visible to each other? Aware of each other? Or simply fixed, locked, made permanent by the act of being witnessed simultaneously? I think my friends stopped looking because some part of them understood that looking was the thing that would make it worse. I think they were right. I am going to close this notebook and leave it on the table and go to bed. I am not going to look at the living room on my way past it. I am going to walk down the hall with my eyes on the bedroom door, and I am going to go inside, and I am going to close the door, and I am going to lie down. I am choosing not to look. I think she would understand.